Hi everybody, and welcome to our very first attempt at online instruction through YouTube. Our topic today that we're going to try to get just the basics of, but to get a little explanation from what you read and a little bit deeper understanding of this is the causes, the causes of the First World War. So to understand the causes of the First World War, we use an acronym and we talk about the four main causes of World War I, MAIN. And so the four main causes of World War I are what we call medium-term causes. So this is really what the war is being fought about. It's not really why the war starts. It's not really why it starts specifically in 1914. The four main causes are really just what are the motivating factors behind why there had to be a war at all. And of course, the four main causes of World War I are militarism, that's the M, alliances, that's the A, imperialism, that's the I, and nationalism, which is the N. So we're going to go through each one of these four and just kind of explain how they work and what they are and what they mean and how they lead to World War I. Starting with the M is militarism, and militarism really works in two different ways. The first way is militarism in general was this idea that people thought the military was a great and glorious thing. They thought that it was a very important thing for them to do, and that it was going to be kind of a good way of securing the future of their country. Now, we also have to keep in mind that the reason why they can be so excited about the military and they can think that it's an adventure and that it's a really great thing is that they really haven't had a war since 1815. At least not a very big major war, right? After the Congress of Vienna in 1815, they established the Concert of Europe, which was an attempt to create a lasting peace. And of course it did for 99 years, from 1815 until 1914. So people had this kind of romantic sense of what being in the military and what a war was and what it was going to be like, and they really wanted to be a part of it. So that's the first way that militarism really works. The second way is countries themselves, rather than individuals, started to get into a competition with each other over what we call an arms race. So if you look at the table that I've got up here on the screen right now, what we're looking at here is the size, or what is called the displacement, of naval ships. Starting in 1905, the British really started to construct ships that were really, really, really big and very, very, very powerful. So the very first one was called the HMS Dreadnought, and that's this ship here. This was first launched in 1906, and when they designed it, they specifically designed it to be so big and so heavily armored that no naval cannon in the entire world could possibly puncture its armor, which basically is why they also called it the Dreadnought. So Dreadnought is a combination of two different words, dread, which means fear, and naught, which means nothing. So they literally designed this ship so that no gun on earth could penetrate its armor, and then they called it the Fear Nothing, the HMS Dreadnought, right? Her Majesty's ship Dreadnought. Now, the British actually launched 4 of these right away, starting in 1905, and when they did, everybody else in the world, at least the major industrial powers, had to respond to that. They had to build their own ships. They also had to build bigger guns that could poke holes in the Dreadnought. And what you can see here in this chart is that over time, the size, which also means the amount of armor and the number and size of the guns, in all of these different navies continues to climb and climb and climb and climb and climb, and all of them are trying to outdo each other. That's the component of the militarism, which is called the arms race. And here we can see a contemporary cartoon from a magazine called Puck, in which you can see all the major countries of the at least Western world, right? The United States, the Japanese, the Germans, the British. They're playing poker and they're kind of one-upping each other in terms of their bets, and they keep raising the stakes over and over and over, getting bigger and bigger ships and more technology. And that's really the second way that this militarism works, is that it gets people individually excited about fighting a war, and it gets countries preparing for that war. And again, that's one of the medium-term causes for World War I. Following that, we now get the A, which is alliances. So when it comes to these alliances, there's a couple of general things that you really need to know that are really super important. Number one, the alliances in general were all secret. Now that's a big deal because countries that go to war don't really know what they're getting themselves into. if one country decides to go to war against another country, so just as an example, when Austria decides to go to war against Serbia, what they don't know is they're not just going to war against Serbia, they're also going to war against all the countries that Serbia is secretly allied with. And we'll get to what those countries are here in a little bit. But the first big point in the alliance system is that they're secret. And that really makes the war much worse than what anybody really thought it was going to be. The second big piece of this alliance system is it was designed specifically to try to maintain that balance of power. And so hopefully you guys remember from the Congress of Vienna that after 1815, Europe is trying to maintain a balance of power so that they don't have to have another war again. So the real problem with this is Russia. And Russia was such a big, and powerful and important country that other countries were afraid of it. And we also had a couple of smaller countries that were really super important as well. So the place we're going to start with this is actually, if you look at the map just north of France, there's a blue country, a light blue country called Belgium. Belgium originally got its independence in 1839 from the country of France. And because of that, they were really kind of afraid that France or maybe even Germany were going to try to come and take them over. So in 1839, they went to the United Kingdom, to the British, and they asked them to form an alliance so that the British would protect and guarantee that Belgium would always be a free country. And the British did that. Now, the big problem with that is, of course, they didn't tell anybody that, but the British, when they promised the Belgians, we'll make sure you stay independent, that was basically a point of honor that they said, we have to protect our little friends in Belgium and make sure that nobody comes to conquer them. So that's really the first big alliance that's important, is the Belgian-United Kingdom alliance of 1839. Following that, we get a couple of other alliances that are really important. And of course, the big one here is to try to counteract the growing power of Russia. Germany and Austria-Hungary, or the Austro-Hungarian Empire, formed an alliance in 1879 that was called the Dual Alliance. And basically the way it worked is if you went to war with one of those countries, you were going to war against both of those countries. And so they were going to fight together, they were going to work together, they were going to be allies, and they were going to essentially, start to collect their power together in order to stop the growing power of Russia. Big problem there is they didn't tell anybody about it, right? Which is kind of a big issue. But also, of course, what we see is that they're looking at the situation, and if you look at the map, you can kind of understand this. They're looking at trying to separate Russia from the rest of the world so that they can cut off their trade, so that they can cut them off from other relationships that Russia has. And so they look at that situation and they say, okay, well, we can pretty much do that in the Baltic Sea. We can isolate Russia in the north. The problem really becomes what happens in the south. So what they decide to do is in 1882, right, about 11 years after the country was first formed, they go to the country of Italy and they ask them if they would like to join the Dual Alliance, if they would like to form what is called the Central Powers. And the Italians said, well, we're a brand new country, so why don't we try to make a good relationship with these other older, bigger countries like Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they do sign off on the Dual Alliance in 1882, forming what we call the Triple Alliance. Now the problem is Italy wasn't really that interested. They weren't really that afraid of Russia. They just joined because they thought they were going to get something out of it. So what we see from that here is a cartoon from the 1880s, which shows that on the left you've got the German Kaiser, on the right you've got the Emperor of Austria-Hungary, and then in the middle you've got this little Italian squirt who is not considered really to be an equal member of the Dual Alliance. They don't have nearly as much respect. They don't really get paid as much attention to. They're seen as the weaker member of the alliance. From this, though, we refer to this group as one of two things. Either we call them the Central Powers or we call them the Triple Alliance, right? And they're forming together, but what that really does is it offsets the balance of power that the Congress of Vienna created. Next, what we've got is it took about 12 years for anybody to really figure out what was going on with the Central Powers. But in 1894, France and Russia realized that if Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy were allied together, it made France and Russia both a lot weaker. So, in 1894, France and Russia formed an alliance together that said, if you attack one of us, you're attacking both of us. Now remember, this is still a secret alliance. Nobody actually knows this yet. In 1894, I'm sorry, no, that is wrong. In 1904, France and the United Kingdom form another separate alliance, which is called the Entente Cordiale, which is a friendly relationship, I guess is the way that you would say that. And again, if you go to war with France, you're also fighting the United Kingdom. That's in 1904, but it's a separate alliance. Now, the final stage here is in 1907, the United Kingdom and Russia formed their own separate entente and created what is called now the Triple Entente, or what we as Americans call the Allied Powers, because eventually we're going to join that side of things too. That eventually comes together where Russia, France, and the United Kingdom are all allied together in 1907 to form this Triple Entente, and that's their team. If you look at the map, basically the way World War I gets organized is there's the inside countries versus the outside countries. Britain, France, and Russia versus Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now, this also caused some problems as well because Germany and England were both governed by, or ruled by, grandchildren of Queen Victoria. And Germany especially thought that they had a special relationship with the British, and they really thought that they should be closely allied with the British. When the British turned around and made an alliance with the French, it really upset the Germans. And we can see that from this particular cartoon that I've got on the screen now, where the British Jack Tar figure is going along with the French woman, and the German Kaiser, he's kind of sticking his nose up, and he's not really happy, and he feels as though he's kind of been slighted, and like his buddy has cast him to the side. Right? So by the time we get to, really 1907, 1910, 1914, what Europe looks like, really more than anything else, is this. You've got the Central Powers in the middle. You've got the Entente powers on the outside of Europe. And they're basically organized, waiting, to go to war against each other. Now, the third medium-term cause of World War I is imperialism. And one of the issues that comes from imperialism is this idea that European countries initially started to create their empires to keep and maintain that balance of power from the Congress of Vienna. This worked just fine when you could go to Asia and you could conquer, and you could go to Africa and you could conquer. And remember that the European powers in 1884 sat down in Berlin at the Berlin Conference that you guys did a simulation of and organized themselves to talk about how they were going to divide up Africa and keep everything very civilized and very peaceful, at least for the Europeans. And it was ultimately to try to avoid a war. Now the problem becomes by the time we get to 1914, pretty much all the land in the world has been snatched up by one empire or another. And so when they run out of things to expand their power into, then they're going to have to get into a direct conflict with each other. And what that means is eventually when the land runs out, imperialism is going to lead to direct conflict between different European countries, and that's going to make it a lot harder to stop the war when the war eventually is going to happen. Finally, and I'm going to go back to this particular map to talk about the N, which is nationalism. Nationalism became a really big problem in Europe, and it became one of the causes of World War I because we get a couple of things happening here. If you look at this particular map, down in the southeastern corner of Europe, in what used to be the Ottoman Empire, we already know that nationalism is killing the Ottoman Empire, right? All of those different countries like Romania and Bulgaria and Serbia and Montenegro and Albania and all these different countries, they all want to have a country of their own. They all want to get free of the Ottoman Empire, and they do eventually get that. But that then causes some other problems because, of course, everybody's still worried about Russia. And again, if you look at the map here, it makes a lot of sense why. Russia wants a warm water port. They're looking at all these new countries in the Balkans, and they say, if we just go down there and conquer all those Balkans countries, we can set up a port on the Mediterranean Sea that'll never freeze, and we'll be able to trade forever, and we'll be super rich and super powerful. So the people in the Balkans are afraid of what the Russians are going to do. And so are the Germans, the Austro-Hungarians, and the Italians. They're all scared of the Russians as well. Now, the one country that's kind of the key to this whole nationalism thing is that little country there called Serbia. Now, we did talk about Serbia in the 1800s, and we talked about how they kind of sort of got their independence, but they weren't allowed to tell anybody about it. And then eventually they do get their independence, but then they get really worried about the Austro-Hungarians. Serbians were worried about being taken over by Austria-Hungary. So what Serbia did, of course, is they made an alliance, a secret alliance, with Russia. And so when it came time for there to be, a conflict, Austria-Hungary thinks that they're going to go to war against Serbia, and what they don't realize is they're at the same time going to go to war against Russia. Serbians want to not be controlled or dominated by any other country. So again, this nationalism and the sense of nationalism really plays into the origin of the First World War, and that Balkans region becomes what we call the powder keg, or sometimes we call it the boiling point. So what you can see here is all of the different European countries that are trying to keep a lid on the Balkans problems, try to prevent those problems from spilling over into a war. And again, because we live 100 years later, we know that eventually this is going to fail. War is going to start in the Balkans, and eventually it's going to lead us into World War I in general. Now, for the next time, what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to talk about the short-term causes of why does World War I actually start in the summer of 1914. So I hope that this video was helpful for you in terms of what caused World War I to happen. Please, let me know if you have questions. Leave it in Google Classroom. Send me an email. Leave it in comments down below. And I will see you guys in the next video.